don't worry, changed my sunglasses from last week. No shirt, no pockets, so we're gonna do good. It's not gonna be as awkward. But it is Tuesday, and I love Tuesdays. And so I wanted to maybe make another devotional. I was gonna wait for Chad, and he came home and he broke one of his fingers, or like dislocated it, and so he was like in and out because he had to go to the doctor. So Chad's not here, but it's just me. But this is actually a true story, what I'm about to tell you, and it's crazy. So this morning, I got out of bed at like 5:50, and Lily hasn't been feeling great, so I went downstairs because she was crying to feed her, and I got out of bed, and in my head, you know how sometimes you wake up and you're like in the wake up funk, and literally there was a phrase in my mind, I'm just going through, and it was, everything must come from overflow. So I was like, downstairs with Lily, everything must come from overflow. And I was like, that seems like a great thought. And in fact, it sounds like God, but I just don't understand why I'm thinking that right now. So, spend time with God this morning with Chad. And I mean, he's like in his chair, although he's been very talkative lately and wants to talk in the middle of it, and I have to be like, Chad. Anyway, so he's sitting in his chair, and I was just thinking about that saying. And so I just told Chad, hey, I think it's probably from the Lord for both of us that everything has to come from overflow. He's like, cool. So, day goes on. And I had read this morning in my Bible reading plan, it was just Psalm 92. And so I was revisiting it out here. And I love using this app called Blue Letter Bible. You can go through and look up what the actual words mean. So I was using it, and anyway, reading Psalm 92. Guess what word I found? This is a true story. It says, but my horn thou shalt exalt like the horn of a unicorn. I shall be anointed with fresh oil. Unicorns, they're real, and they're really popular right now. But anyway, what caught my attention was actually the fresh oil part, because I was just thinking about man, I really need fresh oil. It's been a long week. I know that in the in-between from when that video is actually, anyway, I'm doing these a week ahead, but the point is, Cade had been sick 3 days in a row, and it just wears, obviously, on your energy, and there are just a lot of moments that are low moments where you're like, Lord, I literally am either going to die or you're going to have to deliver me, because I feel like I'm going to die. And just how kindly God comes in. But I was just thinking about that phrase, the fresh oil, and I saw the word unicorn, so that's awesome. But when I was looking up kind of what the words meant with fresh oil, I thought it was so cool, because how he says, I shall be anointed with fresh oil. And we don't really do this anymore in our culture, but back then, if there was a new king, you would come and you'd anoint them, you'd pour oil over them, and it was a symbol of them becoming a king. So I was looking up what anointed meant, and one of the Strong's Concordance words for this in the Old Testament, it's a Hebrew word, balal, but it means several things, but one of the things it means anointed or to overflow with oil. And I was like, oh my gosh, God, this morning I woke up and I was thinking everything has to come from overflow. And I thought that was so cool that the Lord was tying it together in a verse that I would just happen to be reading this morning from Psalm 92. I shall be anointed with fresh oil. I shall be I'll overflow with fresh oil. And I love how I've been thinking about this a lot, that Graham Cook, he's one of the people that I love to listen to, and he has these little segments. They're super restful. You can listen to on YouTube. You can just turn him on. He has a British accent, so anything he says, you're he could talk about nothing and you'd be like, this is so relaxing. But one of the things he talks about is how the Holy Spirit constantly, his agenda with us is to rid us of our independence, which it really hit me, because in this whole season, I have been so amazed at my own need, not just for God, but for other people. I have to have other people with me, especially in those first couple chemos. The idea of going and getting an infusion alone was terrifying. And I think as I've gotten older, I've really prided myself in I didn't realize I actually had this pride, but I was like, oh, I can handle life. I can do this. I can have 4 kids. I can da-da-da-da. And it seems like the Lord's just dismantling those parts of my heart. And he's like, actually, it's really good for you to need people. And not only do I need people in an emotional sense, obviously, but I also need people in a very practical sense. Hey, can you watch the girls? And people have been amazing. My friends have been amazing. But one of the things I love too in this season is ever since Chad and I got married, I really love Chad. I mean, most wives love their husbands, but I really love him. And so I've always thought, oh, my cup is really full from our relationship, and I don't really need anything else, or anyone else. And what's fascinating about this season is because we're both kind of going through it, and you kind of feel like your soul's going through a meat grinder sometimes. We are not usually the best people for each other to talk to. And instead we get so refreshed from other people, which is just really great, because it has taken away this thing in my heart that wants to just be like me and Chad versus the world. And instead it's like, actually, I really need family. I really need friends. And it's been a very healthy thing, I think, for both of us. So I can see how the Lord is ridding me of that independence. But then obviously I think what Graham Cook was saying in that whole thing was also that ridding us of our independence from just daily life, that we're not as dependent as we should be on the Holy Spirit. And I hate that it requires trials to become more aware, but I feel like my awareness of my need for him has gone up like 1,000,000%. And so many times I'll be doing something and feel so defeated, and I'm like, you have to help me. And I literally just say it like that. I'm so rude. Father, forgive me. But I'm like, you have to help me. Like, you have to help me. I don't know how to do this. And how I have felt the Holy Spirit's just constant company, that there's like never been a moment where I've been alone, and that it's so good to rely on him because he loves to pour in. And what I've noticed too is that I can't get the grace for tomorrow today. And there are so many times, even today, we have scans that are scheduled like every 12 weeks. So it's like you get over one scan. I remember the minute we finished that first scan, we're like on this cloud 9, and immediately I'm like, but there's other scans, which is so stupid to go from fear to fear. But it's what my flesh wants to do, what my heart wants to do. And so that's why I need the Holy Spirit. But even thinking like the friendship of God in those moments, that he was with me then, so he'll be with me on the other side of that, and he'll be with me in the future. And just learning to depend on the Holy Spirit is such an awesome thing. And it's so practical. I wish I didn't have to go through this to learn it. So that's why I'm making this video, so that you can learn it today and you don't have to go through stuff. And but just the practical sense of like, what if we just really celebrated? I remember one of my favorite quotes from these books by Cageless Birds, which is Jonathan David and Melissa Helser's like creative initiative. And there was just a random quote in it, and I ripped it out and I put it in a frame. I don't even think you're supposed to do that, but anyway. Point is, the quote was, "My neediness for God is my honor and not my shame." And I think Stephanie Gretzinger just came out with an album called Blackout Album, and I know she has a line like that, like, my weakness is my honor and not my shame. And as I've just been processing through that, it's so cool to think that as I become more aware of my need for God, it's not a shameful thing. Like, he wants to come in and build us up. In the rest of Psalm 92, there's this other part of it that I was loving today. I actually was thinking about it yesterday because I was driving along this really beautiful stretch near the lake, and there are these really beautiful homes. And, sometimes you can look on from the outside of a home and think, I bet they never go through anything. Like, sometimes the enemy just gets in with weird, bitter thoughts. And I'm like, who just said that? That wasn't me. But I'll be driving, and I'm like, I bet their house is so peaceful. And I felt like the Holy Spirit yesterday. I was thinking that, saw this really cute house, and just like kind of wishing myself out of the circumstances. And I felt like God said, no house is safe or peaceful except my house. And you can come to my house whenever you want. Like, you can stay planted there. And I was like, I know there's a verse like that, God. Like, good thought. I know there's a verse to that. Of course, Psalm 92, the one I read today, says, the righteous shall flourish like the palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. They are planted in the courts of our God. They shall still bear fruit in old age. They are ever full of sap and green, to declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. And as I was reading that, just that beautiful thought, they are planted in the courts of God. Like, I can be planted in God's house. I can bear fruit even into old age, that I can be ever full of sap and green. And I love that picture. In fact, on my dad's 60th birthday, which I was thinking about this today, I sent him, it was like when I was getting into calligraphy, which I'm not very good at, but I did for a little bit. And I had done this verse for him because I was like, oh, he's 60, he's old. Which now I'm like, that was probably so offensive, Dad, so I'm sorry. But I sent it to him because I thought, I loved that picture that they still bear fruit in old age. But then today I was just really meditating on that second part, that they are ever full of sap and green, to declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. That we get to like ever be full in the inside. And I think it just ties in beautifully to that thought that the Holy Spirit literally just dumped into my brain this morning, that everything has to come from overflow. I'm sure I've heard that somewhere else. I know a million people probably say that, but it felt really fresh today. And then in reading these verses, it felt really flesh. And I just think it's just a good word for all of us to think about as we're going through life. Like, what if we lived our lives out of the overflow of what the Holy Spirit's doing and what He's depositing in us? So that's my thought. Maybe next week I'll do one without sunglasses, hopefully with Chad. And maybe I won't be in my little office outside, but it's a gorgeous day here. So thanks so much for praying with us, you guys. I love Tuesdays. I hope that if you do journey with us for 18 weeks, you end up loving Tuesdays too, as you contend for the things that are on your plate and in your heart and your life. And as we just celebrate together the way that God speaks and He's moving. So thanks for listening.